conocen, Aaro es profesor de Digital Economics en Tallinn University y trabaja en el Departamento de Economía y Finanzas. Es doctor en Financial Economics y ahora está haciendo una estancia postdoctoral en Zurich. Visitó muchísimos lugares como profesor invitado, desde Katmandú hasta Río de Janeiro y Australia, así que viajado. Y sus áreas de interés actuales gravitan en torno a la economía del conocimiento, las relaciones entre innovaciones, creatividad y valor agregado, y la idea de hoy es hablar de esto, Untitled Regulation, y cuáles son las relaciones entre las regulaciones, el grupo de trabajo y la creatividad. Gracias.
Thank you. Good afternoon. Buenos días. I will speak in English. My Spanish is very limited. So thank you for inviting me to give the talk here. It's not so much on the epistemology of economics, but maybe the connection is in the creativity and such knowledge in intensity part. So this project that I'm going to talk about is part of a larger research program on the regulations, incentives, and capital allocation needed in order to achieve a knowledge-based or wisdom-based economy. So this is one of the sub-projects. How does the regulation of working time affect creativity through different psychological, medical, and economic aspects? So we are doing this project in collaboration of economists, medical scientists, neuromedical scientists and sleep medicine specialists, and also work environment or ergonomics specialists. So the background for the research is that in a global economic system, competition is getting more and more fierce, and such traditional sources of achieving economies of scale and efficiencies have pretty much been exhausted, or it is not a guarantee for success anymore to be just efficient with the classical like capital and labor resources. So the competition is more and more based on innovation, meaning something creative and such wisdom-based and knowledge-based behind that. And it's an important success factor for both advanced economies, who need to retain their competitive advantages, given that they usually have higher labor costs and higher operating costs. So in order an advanced economy to be successful, it needs to be more and more successful in innovation. And on the other hand, developing economies or emerging economies need to focus on the most promising areas in order to achieve some competitive advantages to like enter the market. So just providing cheap labor or otherwise cheap operating costs usually has only a short-term effect, and for longer-term success, such intellectual resources and capacities are needed. There have been all kinds of programs implemented to stimulate innovation, support for innovation-oriented companies, whatever export support, credit support, whatever kinds of financial and managerial and know-how based support to innovative companies. However, the role of some very standard regulations on creativity and through that on innovation and competitiveness in the innovation-based economic system have received very little attention. So they are in many ways taken as granted as something that has existed for tens or sometimes even maybe 100 or more years, and their effects on the modern economic system have received very little attention. One of those is working time regulation. So what is working time regulation? It comes from mainly two sources: statutory regulation, or the government or country-wise regulation, and company level regulation. Statutory regulation is usually in the form of setting a standard working time per week and a standard working time per day. Let's say a standard working time is 8 hours per day, or 7.5 in some countries, or 9. And a standard working week, usually it's 5 days, but it can be 6 days, something like that. So it's a very common regulation in many countries to set by law the duration of a working day and the working week. I don't know about Argentina. Is it the same here, that it's regulated? Yeah. If you have whatever comments or questions, you can interrupt at any moment. Feel absolutely free. And another source of those working time regulations comes from the company level. So companies set even more specifically, or many companies do that. They set the standard start and end for a working day. Let's say a working day starts at 9 and ends at 5, or from 9 to 6, 8 to 4:30, whatever. Very little has changed in the principles of that regulation. Its origins are in feudalistic times, and they have somehow survived up to the present day. So the key reason for arranging people to come in the same place at the same time was the reason for the regulation in the area of industrial revolution, so that all kinds of assembly lines and factories could work properly. So the people had to be in the same place at the same time and do something together. However, now in innovation-based economies, such regulation has not been questioned so much, and there is very little empirical evidence on the relationship between working time regulation and even more broadly working time patterns and creativity. I have brought out some 3 papers. There are a bit more, but overall, yes, there is very limited empirical work on that relationship. So overall, we might think that such fit for all regulations or standard regulations ignore job-specific and even more broadly profession-specific differences in the need for time freedom and broader freedom in order to achieve the creative results that are needed. However, there is research in other disciplines which hints that such fit for all working time regulation might not be a very good idea. Namely, personal creativity is strongly impacted by various exogenous factors, meaning such factors which an individual cannot influence himself or herself. For example, genetic differences. This is how each of us has been programmed. It is something out of our control. Sleeping patterns are to quite a significant extent driven by genetical background. Also, attention abilities and concentration abilities have a strong genetical background, and the overall alertness and reaction speed and such sensomotoric capabilities have a strong genetical background. These are such relationships which have found quite strong empirical support in medical research.
Sorry.
Yes.
In those papers, how is personal creativity defined? Or is a medical definition? How you grasp that concept?
Yeah. So it has been done in different ways in different research. Either there have been some experimental studies measuring people's creative abilities, or through tiredness, emotional tiredness can be measured, for example, by electroencephalography. So you can measure the let's say in simple words how efficiently the left and right side of the brain work together. So there are some specific areas in the brain which lack cooperation and under emotional tiredness. So if you find support emotional tiredness being impacted by sleeping patterns or some genetic differences or whatsoever, so you get a hint that it might be something that impacts people's creativity. So these studies have not been done with the purpose of identifying the causal relationship from working time arrangement and creativity. Is just one element of that chain. Yeah.
How many patterns influencing creativity?
Sleeping patterns. Or
You need more hours, you have more creativity.
It's when we put it into the context of working time. So if people cannot sleep at the time when their biological rhythm tells them to sleep, so they are tired, and as a consequence we can hypothesize that their creative capacities is not as good as it would be when a person could freely choose the working time. So it's let's say a connection between sleepiness and creativity. But this is of course another interesting question, whether the like morning and evening type people have in general different creativity or not. But this is something that we try to find out during one next phase of our study as well, an experimental study. Yeah.
When you're thinking about creativity, what are you thinking about? I mean, what kind of jobs would require creativity, and which ones wouldn't?
Mm-hmm.
What is it to be creative?
Yeah, in our studies, this empirical context, we are focusing on R&D jobs, so research and development jobs. So for our study, we skip like artists and dancers and such musicians. Yeah. So research and development, meaning research, like academic research, also applied research, and development, meaning IT development, product development, architects. We focus on creativity in the context of achieving some innovation. So that's why we have limited for our study it to research and development jobs, creative R&D jobs. There are also some non-creative R&D jobs, like some laboratory assistants or technical staff. So these are excluded, let's say. Creative research and development jobs. So now you asked the same thing. What is on that slide? So this sleeping patterns and working time. When we look at the regulation of working time, then it's evidently some kind of a mean or such normative intervention into the very heterogeneous reality. It sets the working time for or in consideration of the most common people in the different spectra of sleeping patterns. So overall, this morning type of people are prevailing, and also the regulation is more tilted towards morning type of people. So here on the graph are our empirical results. So these creative R&D employees in Estonia, 2015, we just completed the questionnaire-based phase of our study. On 20th of August, we closed the database. So it's all very, very new, and we haven't gone very far with modeling. So some 60, but this is quite representative of such overall sleeping patterns. It's an standardized morningness, eveningness questionnaire, which has been very widely used in medical research. It's a set of some specific questions which do not hint directly that we ask the person about his or her sleeping patterns, but in combination of the answers to those specific questions, we get such a scale, morningness, eveningness scale, so people can be divided into definitely morning type, fairly morning type, neither morning nor evening type, which is the most common one, fairly evening type, and definitely evening type. So overall, they say there are some 6-7% of people who are of such evident evening type, and a bit more of those who are evidently morning types, and the vast majority is something in intermediate or so, yeah. This one.
Does it mean that there is no pattern?
Sorry, that there is no.
Does it mean that there is no pattern?
It just what we can see from here is that people have different sleeping patterns. So if they would not be distinguishable by a morning type or an evening type, they would all fall into this gray category. So if they have some like strong bias towards eveningness or morningness, then they fall into the other categories. So basically the only thing that we can read out from here is that among R&D people who have participated in our study, the morningness, eveningness typology exists, and it is quite similar to the overall morningness, eveningness typology. So we use this morning type, evening type as like control variable, or we do not try to find out how many are morning types, how many are evening types, but we try to find out how whatever sleepiness, work satisfaction, work results, emotional tiredness, physical tiredness and so on are dependent, among other factors, on this morningness or eveningness.
But it means that 61% is indifferent.
61%, yeah, remains somewhere in this. We cannot say that they are indifferent in the sense that they don't care whether they wake up very early or go to sleep very late. They are not indifferent in that sense, but they fall under the standard, let's say 9 to 5 type of world.
The normal guys.
Yeah, the normal guys.
The abnormal guys are 39%.
Normal guys are 61, so 39 are the morning type means that they are even earlier than the standard, let's say 9 to 5 world, and those definitely morning types, they maybe would like to wake up at 4 or 5 or so, while the definitely evening types, they would go to sleep at 4 or 5.
What about age?
Here we don't differentiate on this graph. We don't differentiate it age-wise, but in the econometric modeling, yeah, we take into account gender, age, this like sleeping pattern or the morningness eveningness type, the existence of any chronic diseases and so on.
Is there any relationship between this proportion and age? That's my question.
At this point, I cannot answer. I do not know those details yet by heart, but it is definitely something that we will be looking into those different characteristics. Now we come to one quite fundamental question about regulation as such in a broader context than working time regulation. So the past has been discrimination which is currently regarded as unfair. So different treatment or regulations based on race, ethnicity, gender, age, sexual preferences, whatever. So this is something that is currently regarded as unfair, unjustified, and there is a trend towards equal treatment of all. So whatever person one is, he or she should be treated equally to everybody else. However, as we find out more and more about those exogenous factors that make people different, a very big question, which can mean a total paradigm shift in regulation if it's depending on which way it is answered or not, is whether those exogenous factors which people cannot influence should mean that they should be treated differently by a regulation. We can see elements of this, for example, in special regulations for disabled people. This is something which is regarded as justified and fair to treat, for example, disabled people differently. So there are some other examples, but the question is in the big direction, whether it's towards such fair discrimination or it remains towards equal treatment of all. So in many ways this fair discrimination sounds justified and fair, but if we think where would it end up, then there could be entire nations who have or such ethnic groups who have in some ways different genetic background or in the extreme, we could go so far that already before a birth of a person, based on its genetic characteristics, we could already tell that he or she would be best in doing this or that. So we would end up in a very such predetermined world. Of course, in addition to genetic factors, there are all kinds of other factors coming from the environment and the social system, as many studies on identical twins show that although the genetical background is the same, they perform differently in various situations. So this is a very, very fundamental question for regulation as such. And who determines what is fair and what is justified? So the key hypotheses for our study are that forcing an individual to start his or her daily work at a non-preferential time has a negative impact on that person's creativity. The other one is that forcing an individual to work daily for an unpreferential number of hours has a negative impact on the individual's creativity. And the third one is that flexible working time has a positive effect on creativity on the condition that conditional on some special features. I will not go to detail, but it's related mostly on self-discipline. So whether a person is able to control his own time or not. It can be in two ways. Either the person does not find self-discipline and self-motivation for work, or the opposite, that if there is no limitation on the working day and working week, people might overwork if they cannot keep their such creative capacities under control when they become tired. So broadly, the consequence or the relationship between the different variables are such that when we start with unsuitable working hours, then these often result in too long working days, meaning that people, when they work at unpreferential times, need to devote more time to complete the working tasks. And also what we see from our empirical study as well is that anxiety is an important stress factor and obstacle to achieving creative work results. So this in turn results in sleepiness, meaning that people sleep too little or they sleep at the wrong time. So these sleeping patterns, which have a strong genetical background, mean that it's not only the sleeping hours, but also, or even more importantly, the time when one sleeps, which determine sleepiness. So based on such circadian rhythms, which are biologically driven. If a person sleeps for those normal 8 hours at the time which is not suitable for him or her, he would still feel sleepy or not rested. So sleepiness is one of the drivers for both physical and emotional tiredness, which would have a negative impact on work motivation, and it ends up in hindered creativity. And from the employer's perspective, it would mean lower productivity in R&D jobs, or the work tasks not being completed, or the quality of work being lower. And from the individual's perspective, it means an unbalanced work and life proportions, in addition to the health problems. So when we look at the empirical study which we just completed, 30% of the R&D employees feel that working time has set limits to their sleeping patterns. So it's quite a high percentage. Nearly 1/3 think that working time has such evident impact on when they sleep and for how long to they sleep daily. So now we come to employer and employee considerations in that context. So evidently, employers are most interested in the work getting done. So the research and development results and innovation achieved. Employers should be quite indifferent about the intertemporal exchange of working hours. It does not cost either anything, or it costs very little to allow people to work earlier or later than the standard working times, especially as flexible time of work is usually in combination of the possibility to do work from home. So it usually does not add, at least not much, to office costs to allow a flexible working time. An obstacle can be teamwork requirement. So basically coming back to this industrial revolution times, when people need to be at the same assembly lines all together. It happens in some creative R&D jobs as well, that in IT development, in some cases, for example, that people need to be in the same place, same time, discuss something together. And another obstacle can be the self-discipline of employees, which I already mentioned. From the employee's perspective, one of the main aspects is the time allocation between work and leisure. So the more free time a person gets, the lower are usually also the income or wage expectations, and the higher the work satisfaction is. And another important aspect is time efficiency. So how much time does the employee need to complete a specific task dependent on whether he or she follows a standard or flexible working time. And of course, health effects that come as a result of sleepiness, tiredness, and so on. So overall, leaving aside some technical details, we could say that if the nature of work permits, flexible working time would be optimal from both the employees and the employer's perspective. And in many ways, flexible working time functions as a form of free extra motivation or replacement of part of the salary. Given that the less the person needs to spend time at work, the lower are usually the salary expectations. So if we try to look at those patterns in a graphical representation, I tried to make the presentation as such non-technical as possible. So first is the relationship between creativity and work results. We might expect a nonlinear relationship here with the overall effect of expected effect of moving from fixed to flexible working time, increasing both the work results in broad terms and the creativity, or it would be better to say that it has a positive effect on creativity and thus on work results. Looking at the work results and work motivation conditioned on tiredness and sleepiness, we expect again a nonlinear relationship here with the lower the tiredness and sleepiness, the higher the work results or work efficiency or whatever we put on that scale, as well as work motivation should be. And the salary expectations and work leisure time relationship is evidently also in the direction of more leisure, lower salary expectations, and these salary expectations can be in a broader sense such motivating factors at work, so they are not always in monetary terms. And on the tiredness, sleepiness, and time effort scale, evidently the less tired and sleepy the person is, the less time it takes to complete the work task. So the big question is in the shape of those non-linear relationships, but this is something that we expect to find out at the following econometric modeling part of the research project. So here some empirical results just to illustrate the situation when we ask people how would they prefer to work. Then quite a large proportion, 35%, would prefer to work for different hours at different days in R&D, in creative R&D jobs. 21% said that they would prefer a working day with a regular and irregular part, meaning that there is some kind of such common time when all the employees are together in one place to have whatever meetings and whatever else is needed for teamwork purposes, while the rest should be flexible. So overall, some 56% would prefer flexibility in working time. Another 23% would prefer a fixed start time, which can be driven by non-work reasons, like the need to take a child to school or husband or wife to work in the same car or whatever else. So these are not necessarily such individuality-driven factors which determine the preference for a fixed start time, and some 19% would prefer a fixed start and end time. However, it tends to be later than the regulated working time. So this was something a bit surprising, that when we asked over how many days would the creative R&D people like their work to be concentrated or spread over the week, a vast majority, 61%, would like their work to be concentrated on 3 to 4 days and to have another 3 to 4 days for free. And only some 20% would prefer the standard 5 days regime, and 11% would not make a difference between working days and 3 days. And some 4% would like to work on 1-2 days only. So it seems that the problem with as we will soon see, the tiredness and sleepiness are a huge problem in R&D jobs. So probably the reason is that in creative R&D jobs, it's very difficult to like switch oneself on and off from work. So the brain retains thinking about those creative ideas, and maybe the best ideas come whatever when eating dinner or already in bed before sleep or whenever. So in order to leave room for that creativity, and at the same time be sure that there is enough time for sleep, people would rather work more intensely over some days and then try to switch off over the other days to get rest. So the standard working time does not to be inherently in accordance with the needs of creative jobs. And when we ask directly, does current working time arrangement hinder your creativity? Some one-fourth say that largely or moderately. And the key obstacles to creative work results that those employees perceive are emotional tiredness and sleepiness, which were very dominating. Problems, unclear work tasks, inefficient time use, unfavorable working environment, and inadequate salary. And the worst result was the sleepiness test results. Again, we don't ask directly whether you feel sleepy or not, but it's a combination of different questions that end up in the standardized and quite widely used sleepiness test. 52% of the respondents had strong daily sleepiness problems and potential sleep apnea, and 42% had sleepiness problems to be strong enough to hinder work ability and the quality of life. So it's quite evident already from these very preliminary results that in creative jobs, creative R&D jobs, this working time regulation and tiredness, sleepiness, and creative work results appear to have such strong relationships. And when we ask people how would they perceive the effect from changing their working time, so those who work at flexible working time, when we ask them what would happen if they would need to switch to a fixed working time, they would say that there would be a negative effect on both their work satisfaction, work results, and quality of work. However, the effect is not so strong, which is a bit surprising. However, when we ask those R&D people who work currently at a fixed time, what would happen if they would switch to flexible working time, they say that there is a strong positive effect, or strong expected or perceived positive effect on all those work satisfaction, work results, and the quality of work. So in conclusion, fixed regulation of working time, meaning this from 9 to 5, seems to lead to the use of the capacities or resources of creative people at suboptimal times, and thus underutilizing their potential for creativity, and as a consequence it leads to inefficiencies for both the employers and the employees. So here there could be a paradigm shift, if we call it with such grand words, or a change in the way of thinking about working time as such, so that both statutory regulations and company level regulations could be revisited, and it could have a potentially very strong effect on stimulating innovation through better motivation of creative employees. And as a next step of our study, we have a follow-up questionnaire during the darkest time of the year in Estonia. This winter and summer times are very different in terms of light. In summer we have almost no nights, and in winter it's almost the entire day is a night. So we have some 4 hours of daylight in December. So the follow-up questionnaire will be during the darkest time of the year, and we would then, when we have to or the same person questioned at 2 periods of time, then we can use these fixed effects models to eliminate the individual effects. And a more interesting part, which will follow, is an experimental study when we have already agreements with employers on that. We ask people to follow for 2 months, let's say, a fixed working time regime, and thereafter 2 months of a flexible working time regime. And during those 2 intervention periods, we would measure their reaction speed, sleepiness, some creativity tests, this electroencephalography, myometric testing of physical tiredness, and so on. So to get such measured results instead of the purely perceived results. So that's it. If you are interested, welcome to Estonia. We have at our university an annual conference every June, which is the lightest part of the year, maybe 2 hours of night or 3 hours of night, and 21 hours of daylight. And if somebody is interested to study, we have all kinds of English language programs. So if you have any questions, if anybody has any more questions, I would be happy to. Yeah.
Have you conducted any surveys or questionnaires for the employee from the employers?
Employers, yes. We have carried out detailed interviews with them. So there is like a set of questions which we asked from all the employers, and then there is such open discussion. It's interesting that those companies or research institutes or whatever employers who employ a fixed working time, most of them have never thought about these aspects. And there seem to be such a connection that the bigger the organization and the lower the share of creative people there. For example, banks, a large organization, and only a small part of the employees are creative R&D people. Nobody has ever thought that these creative work tasks are in some way different from such usual office work. And when we presented those preliminary results just a week ago or 2 weeks ago, most were very surprised that those sleepiness and tiredness can be so huge problems, and that it might have an impact on the work results. However, those companies or research institutes who have flexible working time, they use it intentionally for the purposes of getting like better results and maintaining higher work motivation of employees. But it was really a really broad scale of working time arrangements. In the extreme, there was one company where there was basically no office. The CEO came just to meet me. It was the only reason why he came to work, and he said he has absolutely no idea where the employees are, whether they are in Estonia or somewhere abroad, or he didn't know anything about where the employees are located or when are they working. He cared about the results only, and it's a very successful company. At the same time, the other extreme was one very large IT development company where those creative R&D people had to register their entry to the building with a card, and when they go out, they register that they leave, and their salary depends on how much they sit behind the desk. So those creative people are treated in very, very different ways, and it's interesting to see what comes out when we get to the econometric part. What's the effect of such prisoner treatment on the creativity? Maybe it's a good effect. Who knows?
How many companies participate
in your study? Currently, in this questionnaire, there were some have like subdivisions, but 8, let's say, such bigger companies. In Estonian case, it means 24% of all the bigger employers of R&D people. Total Estonia is 1.3 million people. So we have total 50,000 companies, or in all sectors. Total is 50,000 companies. There are all over Estonia some 3,000 R&D people. 2,000 of them work in universities or hospitals, which we excluded because of the teaching schedules and the like medical whatever procedures having a very strong impact on their time regulation. So there was total some 1,000 creative R&D people left. So we chose those companies which have more than 15 creative R&D employees, and there are 24 of them, and 8 out of 24. Relatively large. In Estonian context, it's a very large sample. Yeah. But some have. It's yeah. In the global context, it's very small. But so what we plan to do is once we have completed the pilot study in Estonia, to do the same in some other countries, because all those questionnaires are placed in English, and so it's easily doable.
How do you measure the creativity?
Yeah, this is. This is a very good question, because already to define creativity was very difficult. So for the experimental study, when we have to measure it, then we try to employ some creativity tests, which is one of the very few, or even the only, such measurable ways to capture creative capacities, and we would also use like direct interviews with the employer and the employee to find out how the creative work results changed or did not change. For the questionnaire-based study, we just used the word creativity, so that the person himself or herself would like define it for himself, because trying to find the common definition for creativity appeared too difficult, so that the employers who fill in the questionnaire would grasp the idea. Yeah. So,
because we need to land.
yeah. So thank you for listening, as it was not exactly on epistemology. So yeah, thank you again, and welcome to Estonia. Thank you.